Before we continue, I'd love to know, where in the world are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. It's amazing how stories like this bring us together, no matter the distance. And if you're feeling the emotions, in this journey, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on the bell. Tomorrow's story is one you won't want to miss, full of unexpected twists, heart, and hope. So stick around, join our growing story-loving family, and let's go on this adventure together. See you in the next chapter. This dating contract was supposed to be business, until it became the most unexpected love story. Grace Walker never thought her world would flip upside down in a single night. At just 25, she had learned how to stretch every dollar, how to smile through exhaustion, and how to hide fear behind hope. Working long shifts at a roadside diner in rural Georgia, she had no time for dreams of luxury, love, or anything beyond paying the next medical bill for her father. Her days were filled with worn-out shoes, burnt coffee, and the soft hum of small-town silence. But Grace carried on, not for herself but for the people she loved. One rainy evening during a high-end charity gala where Grace was helping cater, everything changed. The guests were wealthy, dressed in suits and gowns worth more than Grace, made in a year. She moved through the crowd, unnoticed and invisible, until her eyes met his, Cole Montgomery. Known in headlines as a ruthless billionaire investor, Cole was colder in person than she had imagined, his presence commanding and unreadable. She didn't expect him to speak to her, but he did. And what he offered wasn't a tip or a complaint. It was a deal. Out of nowhere, Cole invited her to sit with him after the event ended. His tone was quiet, his expression unreadable, but his words were clear. 6 months, public appearances, my girlfriend, $280,000, no questions asked. Grace thought it was a joke. Then she realized he was serious. Every part of her wanted to walk away. She wasn't a woman who could be bought, not even by a man with skyscrapers in his name. But Cole didn't pressure her. He simply slid a card across the table and said, "Think about it." And then he left. That night, Grace lay awake in her small bedroom, her father's oxygen machine humming from down the hall. Bills were scattered across the kitchen table like confetti from a party she'd never attended, and all she could see was that number, $280,000, enough to pay off their house, enough to get her father the treatment he needed, enough to breathe. Her heart battled her head. She had never compromised her integrity, never even considered it. But was helping her family really a compromise, or was it courage? By morning, she made a decision that would change her life forever. She dialed the number on the card with trembling hands. When Cole answered, she spoke only 3 words. "I'll do it." What she didn't know then was that this wasn't just her contract. It was the start of a journey that would test everything, her values, her limits, and her heart. And for Cole Montgomery, this so-called arrangement would challenge more than just his past. It would shake the very foundation of everything he thought he knew about love, trust, and himself. Grace Walker didn't know what she had just walked into. Days after agreeing to the contract, she found herself sitting in the back of a luxury black SUV, watching the Georgia roads blur into the distance. Beside her was Cole Montgomery, sharp suit, colder eyes, and a silence that felt like stone. He barely spoke. Everything was handled by assistants. A new wardrobe was delivered, a schedule was sent, a confidentiality agreement was signed. From the outside, it looked like a Cinderella story. But on the inside, Grace could feel the weight of every unspoken word between them. Cole wasn't a man looking for love. He was looking for control. In fact, the idea of the dating contract had nothing to do with loneliness or charm. Cole had been burned. Years ago, his ex-girlfriend, Sienna Brooks, had left him for another man, one with more power, more reach, more political clout. The betrayal had carved something bitter into Cole's heart. Since then, he didn't trust people. He didn't trust love. He trusted control. And this contract with Grace? It wasn't romance. It was revenge, served cold, calculated and sealed in legal ink. He needed someone real enough to convince the world, and dangerous enough to get under Sienna's skin. He hadn't expected Grace to be different. He thought she'd be like the others, grateful, obedient, impressed by private jets and Rolex watches. Instead, she asked questions. She challenged him. She didn't smile to please. She smiled when something was real, and that unnerved him. One evening, as they prepared to attend a gala in Atlanta, Grace walked down the grand staircase in a soft emerald dress chosen for her. Cole looked up from his glass of scotch. For a moment, something flickered in his eyes, then vanished. "You remember your part," he said flatly. "Smile. Stay close. Don't speak unless spoken to." Grace met his gaze. "I know how to act, Mr. Montgomery, but I won't be fake." He didn't reply. But for the first time, he couldn't look away. Later that night, as flashbulbs popped and photographers yelled their names, Grace stood beside Cole with practiced poise. Yet even in the sea of designer gowns and champagne flutes, she kept her grounding. She thanked the waitstaff. She asked people their names. She never tried to fit in, she just belonged. Behind his stoic mask, Cole noticed, and it rattled him. Because Grace wasn't playing a game. She didn't want anything from him, and that made her impossible to predict. But this wasn't part of the plan. He had brought Grace into his world to use her. But slowly, unknowingly, she was breaking through the armor he had spent years building. And if he wasn't careful, this contract wouldn't just expose his past, it might expose his heart. Grace never imagined how exhausting it would be to fake a life she didn't ask for. Every day since the contract began, she woke up in a mansion bigger than her hometown grocery store. She wore designer clothes she didn't pick, ate gourmet meals she couldn't pronounce, and walked through rooms where even the silence echoed. But through it all, she stayed grounded. She still called her dad every night. She still scribbled thoughts in her journal. She still looked at Cole Montgomery, not as a billionaire, but as a man who had clearly forgotten how to feel. And that's exactly what started to change everything. At first, they barely spoke unless it was about the next event or the next appearance. Cole was all business, emotionally distant, always one step ahead. But then came the small cracks. It started with a late-night conversation in the library. Grace had gone downstairs for tea. She found Cole already there, staring at a photo on his phone. She didn't ask questions, just sat across from him and waited. Eventually, he spoke. "She said I'd never be enough without the empire," he murmured, still not looking up. Grace didn't answer right away. Then she said quietly, "Sounds like she never saw the real you." Cole looked at her, surprised. For a moment, the tension softened. After that night, things shifted. Cole began walking beside her instead of ahead of her. He asked her opinion in meetings. He started laughing, just a little, just enough to notice. And Grace, despite all her efforts to stay focused, started feeling something dangerous. She started to care, the way he looked at her during interviews, the way he defended her when reporters pried, the way he quietly pulled her out of overwhelming crowds when he noticed her anxiety rising. Those weren't in the contract and she knew it, but her heart didn't care. One afternoon, while walking through a private vineyard on a business retreat, Cole stopped suddenly. Grace was talking about the stars back home in Georgia, how they seemed brighter, closer, more honest. "You know," Cole said, his voice low. "This was supposed to be simple, cold, clean." Grace turned to him. "Yeah, it's not." He stared at her for a long moment, then whispered, "I don't know what this is anymore." She didn't either. All she knew was that the lines had blurred. Somewhere between the staged kisses and scripted smiles, something real had snuck in. But that made everything more complicated, because the moment you start to feel something in a fake relationship is the moment everything can fall apart. And neither of them were ready for what was coming next. Just when things started to feel real, the past walked in wearing heels and red lipstick. Her name was Sienna Brooks, and she hadn't changed a bit. She made her entrance at a black-tie charity gala in downtown Los Angeles, an event Cole had reluctantly agreed to attend, and Grace had nervously prepared for all week. Cameras flashed. As they arrived, arms linked, smiles practiced, Grace was beginning to master the rhythm of pretending, but nothing could have prepared her for what happened next. Sienna appeared at the top of the marble staircase like she owned the night. Tall, elegant, sharp, The kind of woman who didn't just turn heads, she spun entire rooms. Grace saw the flicker in Cole's eyes the moment he spotted her. It was subtle, but it was there. The air shifted. Sienna made her way down slowly, like a lioness circling its prey. She didn't look at Grace once, only Cole. And when she finally reached them, her smile was smooth as silk. "Cole," she purred. "It's been a while." Cole's jaw tightened. "Didn't expect to see you here." She glanced at Grace briefly, then back to him. Clearly, a lot has changed. Grace stood silently, unsure if she was supposed to say something, or just fade into the background, but inside her chest was pounding. After Sienna left to mingle, Cole turned to Grace. "Don't listen to anything she says." But the damage was already done. Sienna's presence lingered like perfume. All night Grace felt it, that nagging question. Was I just a replacement? A pawn? A way to get back at her? And it only got worse. The next day, a gossip column ran a headline, "Billionaire's new flame just a distraction from old one." The article painted Grace as nothing more than a publicity stunt. Sienna's name was everywhere, so was speculation. And for the first time since this all began, Grace didn't know where she stood. She confronted Cole that evening, standing in the quiet of his penthouse living room, high above the city lights. "Why did you choose me?" she asked, voice steady but eyes filled with storm. Was this really about a contract, or was it about her? Cole ran a hand through his hair, tension building in his shoulders. "At first, yes, I wanted control. I wanted to prove something." Grace's breath hitched. "But now," he continued, stepping closer, "now it's different. You're not part of the game anymore, Grace." She looked at him, unsure what to believe, because deep down a part of her wanted to trust him. Another part still felt like the girl from Georgia who didn't belong in this world of suits, secrets, and shadows. And Sienna, she wasn't done yet, because once the past comes knocking, it doesn't leave quietly. Grace didn't sleep that night. She sat on the edge of the king-sized bed, staring out at the Los Angeles skyline, city lights twinkling like lies told with a smile. The contract was still in place, the headlines were still brutal. And Sienna? She was everywhere. On screen, in photos, in Grace's thoughts. But the biggest question wasn't about her. It was about Cole. She could still hear his words from earlier. "You're not part of the game anymore." But what did that even mean? Next morning, she packed her small suitcase and left a note on Cole's kitchen counter. It said, "I need time, not just to think, but to feel." She didn't go far, just to a quiet inn in Malibu, where the ocean could drown out her doubt. For days, she walked the beach alone, replaying every moment from their strange, beautiful mess of a relationship. Was it all fake? Did he ever see her beyond the contract? Was she falling in love with someone who only wanted to win a war with his past? Meanwhile, Cole stared at her note like it was a verdict. He realized something that terrified him. He didn't want to go back to his life before Grace. The suits, the boardrooms, the silence. It all felt colder now, emptier. He'd spent years trying to control everything. Business, emotions, people. But Grace? She was the first person who couldn't be bought, only earned. So he made a decision. No more games, no more contracts, no more ghosts from the past. He found Grace 2 days later, standing barefoot in the sand as the sun dipped low. She didn't turn when she heard his footsteps, but she didn't walk away either. "I ended it," Cole said softly behind her. "The contract, the image, all of it." She looked over her shoulder. "And what now? What's left when there's no arrangement keeping me around?" "Just this," he said, holding up a small velvet box. "Not because I need you to play a role, but because I don't want to play one either. Not anymore." Grace's eyes widened. Her heart stuttered. He opened the box to reveal a simple ring. No excess, no diamonds the size of her thumb. Just honest metal and something that shimmered because it mattered. "Grace Walker," he said, voice cracking slightly, "I fell in love with you somewhere between pretending and the truth, and I don't want a contract. I want a life. With you, no more lies, no more running." Tears spilled down her cheeks, but she smiled. "This was never about the money, Cole, not for me." "I know," he whispered. And as the waves lapped at their feet, she took his hand and nodded. "Yes, Because what started as a lie had somehow become the most real thing either of them had ever known. And this time, it wasn't revenge. It was love. We hope you enjoyed this emotional journey between Grace and Cole. A story that started with a contract but led to something far more powerful. Love that wasn't planned, but deeply felt. Now we want to hear from you. What would you have done in Grace's shoes? Would you have accepted the contract, walked away when the past came back, or fought for something real, even if it began as a lie? Drop your thoughts in the comments. We read everyone and love hearing your perspective. Your voice is what brings these stories to life. And tell us, where in the world are you watching from? We're building a global community of story lovers, and it's amazing to see how far these stories reach. If this story touched you, made you feel something, or even made you rethink the idea of love and redemption, let us know. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss the next chapter. A brand new story drops tomorrow, and trust us, you won't want to miss it. Until then, stay kind, stay curious, and keep believing in unexpected love.